Pop Culture on the Apricot Tree, where we talk about gospel insights through great stories and help you find entertainment that is both true and beautiful. I'm your host, Liz Busby. I'm a writer of science fiction and fantasy, a reviewer of books, and a Latter-day Saint. And with me today is my co-host, Carl.
Hello, everyone. My name is Carl Cranney. I have a PhD in religion, and I like to write on the intersection of pop culture and religious themes in pop culture.
Awesome. And we have, again, a friend of the podcast, Ben Pacini.
Hi, folks. Ben Pacini here. I love this place. This is super fun, and I'm excited to be talking about Top Gun. I was a middle school teacher, and now I teach teachers at BYU Idaho.
And then our special guest today is Brad. Introduce yourself.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me. My name is Brad Wilson. I work at a company called Keslow Camera. We supply the camera packages and work with the camera teams on major movies, TV shows, commercials. My job is just to schmooze with directors, producers to get our gear on their next project.
That's awesome. And as Ben said, today we'll be talking about a little film called Top Gun Maverick, the 2022 sequel to the original 1986 film about military pilots. The movie stars Tom Cruise as an older and maybe not wiser version of his character who deals with some of his regrets from the events of the original film. But first, our best book segment, where we each recommend one thing we're watching, reading, or listening to. My recommendation today is only about a week old. It's the Imaginary Temples Twitter account. If you haven't been there, you need to Google it right now. It's amazing. They use the AI image generation to create fantasy and sci-fi temples. So there's a temple on Dune. There's several Star Wars temples. There's a Hogsmeade temple, and there's a couple Disneyland temples. Like, they're just hilarious images. If you are a nerdy Latter-day Saint, you owe it to yourself to go check it out. It's great fun.
Arrakis, right?
Oh, yes, the Arrakis temple was great. And they had the Star Trek Academy temple, which made me very happy.
Awesome. So cool.
Are they using like Midjourney or one of those AI?
Yeah, one of those AI ones. And
needed a bunch of prompts. And
they're just spot on. They're just so great. And the new one comes out every day. So it's a great warm spot in my day. All right, Carl, what have you got for us?
My favorite of them was the Star Destroyer spaceship Star Wars one. The Starship Temple was. I loved that one. I can also second that recommendation. Mine isn't necessarily a recommendation so much as a report. I have been reading The Silmarillion in an attempt to finally finish it off before we do before I get into and watch Rings of Power on Amazon Prime. But I am very grateful. So I always start off the podcast by saying I have a PhD in religion, which is very vague and non-specific. But to be technical about it and specific, I have a PhD in systematic theology from the Catholic University of America. And I am very grateful that I have that degree because Tolkien's worldview is very Catholic. And I do not think I would appreciate the Silmarillion as much as I do had I not had sort of the academic background that I do. And it's interesting because I do not think Latter-day Saints agree with Tolkien's anthropology, and that is maybe a discussion for another time. But I think by this point, you know if reading Tolkien's dense mythology for Middle-earth is for you or not. So I don't know if I'm recommending it necessarily, but I'm enjoying it quite a bit. And I look forward to getting into Rings of Power once I have finished it and the appendices to The Lord of the Rings, which I also have not read. So more of a report than a recommendation this time, but there you have it.
Well, when you get into Rings of Power, I need all of your thoughts, like all at the same time. I have all the thoughts and feelings myself, so I'm excited to hear them.
Oh, we definitely have it penciled on the calendar to do an episode, so it will happen, people. So be watching.
Awesome.
Ben, what have you got for us this week?
You know, I have to admit, so I've been on a couple of times, and I think I read too many articles and not enough books. Because I've told you the 2 books that I think I've read this year already. Part of that is because I'm doing my dissertation. So if you want to talk about school credentialing, man, have I got things to tell you about how dumb our credentialing system is for teachers. But of late, I've actually, so I wrote an article a while ago that I think will probably figure today in part of our discussion about masculinity and how that plays in. And I've wanted to be reading other people's takes on masculinity. And so I read a really interesting article by, I think his name is Richard Mew, and it's Mouw, and I'm probably saying that wrong, but it was
Richard Mao.
Mao, very famous theologian, right? Like very, very well respected. Just really, really interesting take. So I've been looking at that. There's also a number of Twitter threads. So for example, today there was I will leave him unnamed, but a politician of a certain stripe who said, male feminists need to just grow up and eat a steak. And like, look at what's behind that statement for a second. Like, there's like, this is a big deal, right? Like, there's a huge deal. And everybody is just like, oh, it's such a bad take. Stop saying it's a bad take. You're giving him attention, you're feeding the fire, and you're not saying anything productive. You're retweeting him, right? Let's have a conversation about why he did this. He's smarter than that. He's doing this on purpose. So anything to do with masculinity has been just really, really interesting to me of late. And so that's where I've been spending some of my time.
All right. We'll definitely find a link to that article, and not the tweet, but the article, and put that in the show notes. Brad, what have you got for us today?
So we're in the golden age of TV streaming, and our family's just been really loving She-Hulk, which is a Marvel Studios series on Disney Plus. I've got a 14-year-old, 15-year-old now daughter that's just really loving it and loving the commentary on how women are, represented in media. She breaks the fourth wall and talks about different things, and it's just been a fun show to enjoy with the family. So highly recommend it.
Actually, that reminds me, can I jump in to add one other one? I feel like I've been living under a rock, but I finally finished Kenobi. And it was great. And I am sad that it took me so long, because I was like, that was really good. And I really enjoyed it. And it was super. And I will say this, because I think this will come up later too. I felt that they did a really nice job with a redemption arc, not for a character, but for an actor. And I hope I'm not spoiling it for anybody, but that actor was Hayden Christensen, who was treated very poorly after the prequels, and I think had a measure of redemption as an actor because of what happened during Kenobi in a way that I thought was very special and actually felt very right to me and very emotionally fitting. Like, it just worked. And I thought, of all the parts of that series, I thought that was a really, really special part.
I completely agree about Hayden Christensen, because we know the other actors in the prequels can act. Like, we know that Ewan McGregor can act. We know Ian McDiarmid can act. We know Natalie Portman can act. And for some reason, they still all had careers after the prequels, but Hayden Christensen just did not. It just fell apart. It's not his fault that George Lucas kept telling him to act more like a wooden plank. And so I just, I agree completely. I was so happy to see the fans especially really get behind Hayden's reappearance and work as Vader, which I thought actually was really good and touching and developed Vader's character, the character of Vader, not Anakin, in good and interesting ways. I was also a big fan of Obi-Wan.
Well, bringing it back around to She-Hulk, I've been enjoying that one as well. It's been interesting. I was disappointed that they took out maybe the one Mormon character who is in the Marvel comic universe. Mallory Book in the original comics is the valedictorian of BYU Law School. And in this one, she is very clearly not. She's a totally different character. But so I was hoping they were going to do that, but apparently not. Oh well. Can't win them all. We got Stranger Things, I guess.
That's right.
We have who? Who did you say we have?
Stranger Things.
Oh, and that's all we have. Yeah, no, that's fair. Okay, that makes sense.
Yep. Well, moving on to our main discussion of Top Gun. So I had not seen the original Top Gun. Have you guys all seen the original? I was born the year it came out, so it just never came up for me. What about you guys? I assume you guys have probably all watched it.
I actually watched it for the first time the week before I went to go see the movie, the Top Gun Maverick, in theaters, because I wanted to have that background. And I was like, ooh, maybe I don't want to see this sequel, but I was pleasantly surprised by the difference between them.
No, I vividly remember watching it as a kid, and I wanted the Tomcat patch. That was I wanted that patch. Never got it. Still don't have it, but.
So it's funny, I never saw it, but I played with the toy. Like there was a little like whatever the fighter was. I don't know if it's an F-16 or F-14. Like I don't know the names, right? But like it was the one where the wings would go out and come back in.
F-14.
The F-14, and it was just like, yeah, like, and everybody's like, oh, Top Gun. I was like, I don't know, okay. But I didn't see it till I was in college. And then I saw it and I was like, I get it now. That was a good movie. I like that movie. And it was like, it was a part of the culture, even if I didn't understand the actual references to the movie until a lot later. So it was a part of my childhood, even though it wasn't a part of my childhood.
So it was interesting going in as someone who hadn't seen the original and seeing it kind of uncover what the events were in the original movie. But it does have a lot of the feeling of that 80s retro vibe, even though it's, it's presumably set in contemporary times, but we've got, a lot of the songs and you got just kind of this feeling of a classic 80s Hollywood film. It feels very different from anything that's being produced nowadays, especially in like the age of Marvel, where everything is CG, massive world at stake battles, versus this movie's back to the like practical effects of, okay, we're going to figure out how to film these actors in the cockpit, which is fascinating to me.
I would argue that this is the first nostalgia film that I've seen where the nostalgia was pulled off that well and so effectively that as I look at it, and it like so often, I don't know how to explain this very well. So often a nostalgia piece will feel like it's just trying to pull off nostalgia, and then either it doesn't or it just feels like, okay, but I just watched the same old movie again. Like it wasn't that good. I don't know fully what the magic was. Now, I think I have a couple of ideas. One of them is that they were totally unabashed and totally unapologetic. They were like, you're going to feel like you're in the 80s again. And we're going to have the music and the style and like, and they nailed it. I mean, it was so pristine. Typically when we think of like production value, we think of like really high quality graphics, right? This was a different kind of production value that was like, no, we have to get the feel right. We have to mimic it. We have to like, and somebody told me later, like, there are like 45 hidden Easter eggs of like very deliberately copied things from the original to the second one. My wife and I watched it together and we went through all of them and I was like, yep, I saw that one. Like the football game on the beach versus the volleyball game, right? Like those little Easter eggs where it's like, you wouldn't think that it's an identical copy, but it makes your brain think about both of them in a way that was just really cool. And it was the whole movie. It felt that way. It was a really, really well done thing.
Or the switch from missiles to guns when that actually doesn't exist in the F-14, but they put it in the first one, so they had to put it in this one. Like you would never know that unless you knew it. So
that's a cool tidbit, though. I did not know that.
So I mean, a lot of that is kudos to Tom Cruise because he only signed on when they could fly it, they could do it in the real jets, and have the same feel. And the script had to be perfect. Like going that long for a sequel with Tom at his career where it is, it's like, it's not worth it unless it was going to be perfect. And so it's kudos to him for waiting till they could do it justice.
For sure. And I was reading up on how they filmed in the cockpits, and it just sounds crazy because there's no room for a camera operator in there, right? Like it's the actor and then a pilot, and that's it. So they had to learn how to operate the cameras and do the lighting and such, which is fascinating.
Yeah, lighting was more, they just made sure that the sun was behind them most of the time. That was just the cinematographer working with the pilots as, every day before they'd go up in the air. It's like, okay, you need to make sure that you're going this direction because the sun's going to be here. And that's when you're going to roll. But
No, I just, the watching some of the making of things with these poor actors who had to go through some literal training, because you also can't be in the aircraft if you haven't gone through certain training where they like strap you in and then dunk you in a pool. So you have to learn how to get out in case the aircraft crashes, I guess, into a lake or something, or the ocean. And like everybody was like Tom Cruise set the tone, but he managed to pull the rest of the crew and the cast along with him to make a really wonderful cinematic piece of art. This may be one of the best summer blockbusters I've seen maybe with a narrow definition of summer blockbuster, since like 2012's The Avengers. Like just a perfect something you just go to eat popcorn and watch and have a great time at the theater with. And it was flawless. It was perfect. It did everything it was supposed to, and I had a blast watching it with my family.
And it hits the right emotions where you want to jump back and watch it again and feel those same emotions again. Like it leaves you on that high.
See, that's another rare thing, and I don't know how to explain this very well. It's pretty rare for a movie to be so good that you want to watch it again when you already know the plot. You know what's going to happen. You know all of that. That means that there is enough cultural punch, right? Cultural is the wrong word, but like feeling, emotion, like that whole, all of that other stuff. Because I felt the same. I had to go back and watch it again. In fact, I had to watch it with a friend so I could like actually deconstruct, like, what did I just watch? Like, why did I like this so much? This was really cool. I think that's a really good way to explain it, Brad.
Yeah, I was actually reading recently an essay by C.S. Lewis about literary criticism, and he says your first time through a book is a waste because you're just being compelled along by the narrative, and you don't know if it's a good book until the second time you read it, when you know what's going to happen, and now you can actually pay attention to the craft of it. So some films are like that. Like you watch them through, and then you're like, well, now I know what happens. I don't need to watch this ever again. I don't care. But the really good ones are the ones where you feel like you want to go right back in, and even though you know what's happened, it's more than the narrative.
They're teasing throughout the movie like Maverick's gonna die. Maverick's gonna die. Oh, this is where he dies, or this is where he's gonna die. Oh, he's dead right here, and it's like, even though you know after you've watched it, you still have that same pent up emotion, like, oh my gosh, he's right on the edge, and you still have those same. It still evokes those same emotions, which is fun. It takes you on that nice roller coaster, even seeing it 10 times in the theater like I did.
And I think part of it is the atmosphere that it was released in, right? This film was supposed to come out in 2018 or 2019.
2019 originally.
And then it got delayed to 2020, and then the pandemic happened, and they didn't want to release it on streaming because obvious reasons. It's very cinematic. It needs to be big. And so maybe part of it is just that we're all getting back into theaters when it came out. And it is that kind of movie that makes you say, oh yeah, this is why we have movie theaters and not just streaming.
Well, yeah, I think has the record as the longest film that was marketed from the time that the first teaser trailer was put out to when it was actually released. I think it has a literal world record of the duration between those two. And so you had not only the pent up demand of this movie over 30 years, but also more or less 3 years of people knowing about this movie and not being able to watch it.
And not being able to watch any movie in the theaters. Like, I remember watching that original trailer and going, oh, this may be one of the... I don't watch too many movies in the theater. Like, there's really only one for the rest of this year that I really want to see in the theater. That'll be the sequel to Avatar, because that's, James Cameron's 3D... that's just something you need to see in the theater. Right? It's and I remember watching that going, oh, this might be one of the movies that I'm going to watch. And then to the combination of marketing it for 3 years, like you said, and the fact that we're all itching to get back into the theaters. But I don't think that necessarily completely accounts for the success of the movie, because, you, Brad, you saw it in the theaters 10 times. I can't tell you how many times I have watched certain clips of it on YouTube. I was so excited when it finally was released on digital streaming service and stuff, because that means like the good high quality clips started showing up on YouTube so I could watch them. There are just some scenes I have watched over and over and over again because it just sucks you in, and you're so, even though you know exactly what's going to happen and I have some of them memorized now because I've watched them so much. But they just did something so perfect that you are just completely invested in it. And I don't know enough about movies and cinematography and script writing and the production values to explain why. I just have to say that it absolutely 100% worked.
They manipulated you, but in the best possible way.
Movies are this weird thing where you pay other people to manipulate you and they're successful at it, right? So Carl, I want to hear. I don't want to take it away from Liz because she's running the show, but at some point, I want to hear what your favorite scenes were and why they were so cool to you. But then I also have a premise, and the premise, because I want to answer that question. I think there is an answer to that question, and I think part of the answer. So it was funny because everything has to be politicized these days, right? Everything has to be politicized, and what somebody said was, "Oh, it was great. It was super anti-woke." And I watched it and I was like, there's literally nothing in here that feels woke at all or anti-woke or like, and I think that they are tapping into, like, I think that's limited vocabulary for trying to capture something really important that they don't have good words for. And I want to come back to that in a little bit. Carl, what were your like favorite, what were the ones that you have now memorized? Like, what are your favorite ones?
So the two scenes that I keep finding myself returning to watch on YouTube, and that if I buy you can rent it right now on iTunes for like $6, or you can buy it for like 17. And I'm like, I think that's worth the $11 difference. I'll just buy it. Is the scene at the beginning where he's flying the sort of super like X-38 Dark Star, or whatever that thing is, the plane that the Chinese, in the real world, the Chinese literally tried to take satellite photos of because they thought it was a real, like, skunkworks project that they had let off the leash somehow, which is amazing. That whole scene is just fun because it kind of shows you, I like Maverick's heart, like he's going to do this really reckless and dangerous thing to help all these other people keep their jobs, and it's just a gorgeous scene with him flying up to and then slightly exceeding Mach 10. I love the fact that poor Admiral, I don't know, the Admiral Ed Harris just takes a shockwave to the face, and it actually literally, like, that whole thing where it blows the roof off is a real shot. Ed Harris actually just stood there, and the Blue Angel flies over him. You can see the sort of before the special effects version of the jet flying and just smashing him. I just love that. And then the final fight between all the 5th generation fighters and Maverick and Goose, or not Goose, Rooster, just is so heartfelt to me when he's trying to save Rooster, especially at the end, because he's done everything. He's used all these decades of training and flight hours and skill to just do everything he can, and it's not working. And he, at the very moment sorry everybody, spoilers obviously, at the very moment he failed, and he's like, oh no, now, I killed Goose in the last movie, now I'm gonna kill Rooster. Like, when Hangman shows up and saves them, I don't know, I love the tension, the fighting the superior foe, the whole scene where the little clip where he gets behind the guy and the guy pulls some weird like 360 turning stunt, and they're both like, what was that? Like, the expression of shock on their faces, like, I don't know. Again, I would have to get some person who was really good at analyzing and picking apart the individual shots and the reasoning and even the music and everything to explain why I just love watching these two clips over and over and over again. But I do, because I'm always invested in them, even though I already know what happens in them. I don't know.
So Brad, I think you were telling us before we started about this scene with the like the little shack, the top of the shack, and like destroying the set. Do you want to tell us what happened there?
So the production design team made that shack. It doesn't exist elsewhere. Like, it was just made temporarily for that shot. And so they had an F-18 with a Blue Angel pilot, because the Blue Angels are the only ones qualified or rated to fly any naval aircraft that low to the ground. Like, typical naval aviators aren't supposed to fly that low, but Blue Angel, I guess since they're stunt pilots, they can go that low. And so they buzzed a couple times for, test flights to make sure that they've got all the angles and everything. And then the pilot ended up going super low and just went right over that shack. And they didn't, bolt down that ceiling on the roof on that little shack, because it was just a little temporary structure. They didn't expect it to pop the lid, but it did, and that's the shot that they did. But like I was saying earlier, Ed Harris, I don't know his age. I think he's like 77 or something like that. anyway, is not a spring chicken, and that guy held his ground with that shockwave, just the amount of pressure on him, and he didn't knock down. The other guy like ducks behind the car. You can watch it. The other guy with him, but Ed Harris stands his ground, so kudos to him. But yeah, they did not expect that shack to pop its roof.
And if I'm understanding right, that broke the scene. Like they had to use that shot because they couldn't. Like it was a problem.
That's it. But coming back to Ben's question on why this film worked so well, and the way that I feel like it's hard to make a war film anymore without making a political statement in the war film, right? I think that's why it feels like an older film, because they've made the interesting choice to not pick a real world person to be the enemy target. It's just kind of left like the enemy. And they leave that off to like, they set those political issues aside.
A certain country that opposes the interests of the United States, whose pilots all happen to have black masks on.
Exactly.
Apparently they have snow, so we know about that's it.
Gee, who could they be? I can't tell, right?
They have functional F-14s, and we know that Iran has 24 still, so maybe.
Who knows? But that was an interesting choice, and you could see that as a giving in. The movie was co-funded by a Chinese company, so maybe that's trying to make it marketable in China. We can't pick China. We can't pick any of their allies as the enemy, so we just will leave it blank. You could look at it that way, but I feel like that choice makes the movie more timeless and puts the focus less on the morality of the specific conflict, which is often the focus in a lot of the more recent war movies, especially terrorism ones, right? Where the question is like, do you become the bad guy? How do you not hit civilians? That kind of thing. I'm thinking like even the first Iron Man, where there's lots of questions about the morality of war. This is a pure film about cooperation within a military unit and about learning to work together and those kind of things. And it's able to set aside these political questions that usually come into these films and just focus on that. And I think that's what makes it feel a little older and also opens it up to a bigger audience, because we don't have these political questions that often plague other films.
Well, yeah, it's not necessarily a good guy versus bad guy story. That's really just a little sub part of it. It's more like you said, it's the teamwork that's at the end of the day. That's what the story's about. The bad guy, bad country or whatever. That's just
an outline, and that's all we need.
They just needed that to drive the story along to show the teamwork.
If I may, I think that allows it to be unabashedly pro-American in ways that maybe we as a country need to enjoy again once with so much of the polarization and things, just to be like, you know what? We have pilots who can do amazing stuff to defend us if they need to, and that's awesome. And just to have everybody just go, yeah, that is awesome, is fine. I don't know, maybe, I'm all for nuance and the world is tricky and messy, but every once in a while you just need a feel-good movie about your country, and this can do that. And dare I say, I think maybe we needed one of those, which also may account for part of its success and part of all of our enjoyment of it.
So I think you're nailing something here, which is that people saw this and it felt like a breath of fresh air. Like it felt like I don't have to have angst over my country. I can just watch a movie and it's a good movie. And that felt amazing. I think everybody felt that. Now, what I do want to say is the best part of the movie, first time I watched it, was scrolling through the credits. And then all of a sudden it gets to, we'd like to thank the military officers involved. And it's just like Rear Admiral so-and-so and Second Admiral is like for going and going and going. What I joked was I'd like to thank Vladimir Putin for funding this movie. Right? Like the fact is this is a big advertisement for the military. It always has been. And so in some ways I agree, and I don't think that you're wrong. At the same time, I think that this was a political statement. It was just a well done one, right? This is the kind of movie that made kids in the 80s go, you know what, I want to sign up to go to the first Iraq War, right? Because there is bravery and there's courage and we work as a team. Now, I think to the point that was made earlier,
and they did in the 80s. Like naval recruitment went through the roof when the movie came out, the first one.
And I think it would be naive not to see this as a very similar kind of a thing. Jonathan Haidt always talks about how you can tell a lot about somebody's politics by what kind of movie they watch. And it's funny because all of my pretty far left friends are like, oh, it was kind of dumb. You know, it's fine, whatever. And my kind of right leaning friends were like, that was amazing. That was so good, right? That was super, super great. And by the way, my left leaning friends aren't wrong. One of the things that they pointed out that I think is kind of hilarious is like, we don't really have dogfights anymore. We have missiles. Like, this is kind of a silly thing. We all kind of know it, but we suspend reality because it's really boring to watch a bunch of missiles fire at different places. Like, it's just not a good movie, right?
And they even allude to that with Rear Admiral Keynes being the drone ranger. Sorry.
Right. Like, hey, we're gonna replace all of these with machines here soon, right? But it doesn't make for a compelling movie. Now, I think the other thing that was going on here, what was I going to say? It wasn't that it was anti-woke or woke. It just felt like a movie that you could enjoy and watch. But I absolutely believe that there are undertones to that. I think that there are, I was talking about my left-leaning friends and my right-leaning friends. I think that the idea that it is devoid of any like politics isn't correct at all. I think there were politics. It's just the politics we were used to in the 80s and 90s, which is our country is basically good. It is good to be brave. It is good to be like willing to work as a team. I will say this. I think a lot of movies start out as fighter pilot movies, but they actually turn into admiral movies. And those are actually really boring and angsty because they're really morally fraught and they're really hard. And now the fighter pilot is trying to decide on the morality of war and like, should I shoot at innocents? And like these really, really heavy questions. And you just go, that was just really heavy. Like that wasn't fun. That wasn't enlightening. That was just really hard. And this was like, I take orders, I do my thing, I go and blow up the thing, and then everybody is safe because of it. That's what I do. There was a certain amount of relief because of that. It was a medium level film. It was never a heavy film. And I think that was a really, that at least part of it was why I liked it so much.
For sure. It reminds me of Ender's Game. If you cut off the end of Ender's Game and just did the battle school stuff, where it's all about leadership and learning to work together as a team. I really enjoyed that it was focused more on the individuals in the military. Because you're right, it can be big political statements when we make a military movie. But this was more about people. And I'm going to be a stereotypical female and say the fight scenes were fine for me. They were fine. I don't see movies for fight scenes. Sorry. The part that surprised me when I went to see this film with my husband, because it was the one we could agree on, was the regret and forgiveness plot with Maverick and Rooster, right? Because we have this thing in the background, which, not having seen Top Gun was gradually revealed to me, which I liked that effect. If you'd seen Top Gun, then it had a different effect, I'm sure. That Maverick had through an accident ended up killing Goose with his irresponsibility, right? And so that has affected all of Rooster's life, right? That he's grown up without a father. And then the fact that they have to work together and that they have to have some kind of respect between them, and learn how to put that huge thing behind them. I felt like the movie handled that really well. It's hard to talk about forgiving someone who killed your dad, right? Like, this is not an easy thing. And I was surprised by how well it was handled in this movie.
I like that they also built it up in a couple ways. So you talk about how you went into it having not seen the original, and this backstory plotline is revealed. There was a second element to it about the reason why Maverick held Rooster back from going to the academy, which was at the behest of his mother. And so that was something that, for those of us who had seen the original, was also sort of a slow reveal sort of thing. And I like that by the end of the movie, I don't think Maverick has ever told him, and never will, that the reason he did that was at his mother's behest, because he didn't want to ruin the relationship with his mother posthumously. I guess maybe they just wanted to do it that way so they didn't have to hire Meg Ryan to be in the movie. She plays his mother in the first one. But the principle of other people are acting in what they think is good faith and might end up doing something that damages you, and to give them grace in that as well was also part of the success of the movie. To show how how it is possible in the face of the important things, in this case, trying to get out of an enemy fighter camp with 5th generation fighters flying all around you, that's more important than whatever beef you got with each other. Is also thinking long term from a Latter-day Saint or a Christian perspective of loving our enemies, forgiving those who have trespassed against us, because in the end, that's going to be more important than whatever beef you have because of the shenanigans the two of you got up to in this life. As hard as that can be, that is the ultimate goal of Christianity, to turn us all into people who will forgive each other for all the things we've done against each other. We are all victims of each other's sins as well as of our own sins. And I thought the movie handled that quite nicely through just some fun, fighter jet dogfight stuff.
I think if I'm hearing you right, Carl, what you're saying really resonates with me, because what you're saying is this could have just been a fun movie that I went and watched once. I actually expected that. I expect when everybody was like, "It's going to be so good. Oh, you're going to love it. You're going to have a great time." I thought that what they meant was high production values, and it's Tom Cruise again. And I was pleasantly surprised because there was a depth to it that I did not foresee. I did not see that coming, and it came from the forgiveness arc. It came from relationships. It came from the teamwork stuff. In part, it was the nostalgia value. The other piece that I think was really meaningful, and this goes back to Hayden Christensen, there was another actor who was redeemed here. And it wasn't because he was maligned as a bad actor, but Val Kilmer is not somebody I've seen in a while because of his throat cancer. And he's kind of been sidelined, not because of his own choice. He's a brilliant actor. I loved all of his stuff. I mean, he was the voice of God in Prince of Egypt, right? Like this is like he was my childhood. Like he was the guy. He was like Tom Cruise. That's why he was in the movie. And all of a sudden he's gone and he's not around anymore. For them to include him in the way that they did it brought me to tears when I watched it. And it was especially cool to read up later. Apparently Tom Cruise said, yeah, that he's been my wingman ever since, right? Like he and I did not get along apparently originally or on the first set. And now we're like brothers, and like we were laughing the whole time. Like it was actually hard for us to to actually finish the shots in the serious shots because we were making jokes and stuff. But there was something really special. And from what I gather, Tom Cruise really had to push and say, no, Val needs to be in this.
Yeah, he more or less put his foot down and said he wasn't going to do it unless they could get Val. And in fact, they thought Val was going to die. And so that was the first, they grabbed cameras before they were really even ready to go and shoot that scene. Because again, they didn't know. He was just diagnosed and going through that. And they're like, oh my gosh, he's going to die. We got to hurry and get the scene. Luckily he survived and they went back and reshot it. But yeah, that just shows like that was critical to that movie, is having that scene in there.
I think I see, and I didn't know that part. The other thing I was going to say is like Tom Cruise gets a pretty bad rap publicly for a lot of things, and maybe he deserves some of that. That's fine. I don't know the guy. I don't know. Like I left this movie thinking, you know what? He's more than just a good actor. He's a human being. And the little things that I saw of him, like fighting for Val Kilmer, that changed him in my view. I thought that was really special and unique. The teamwork would have been there. Like that would have been part of the plot, right? The good guys winning, that would have been part of the plot. None of that would have surprised me. But the depth, I think, came from some of those deeper things.
Yeah, just this realistic scene, because the actor is somewhat not acting, right? Because he is struggling with the same thing in his life. And that scene with Iceman is like the critical scene where Maverick is able to realize like something matters more than this regret that I've had my whole life. Like I need to get over this. I need to do what's right now. And just kind of that eternal perspective, you might say, that this lends the film, right? That lends the characters. And it you're right. It feels so real and it feels so authentic.
Well, and throughout the beginning, he's like putting it off. They're just over text and things like that. And it's when he finally sees it that sort of shifts the tone of the rest of the movie in that direction.
Yeah, yeah.
So another thing, behind the scenes kind of thing. So I don't know if you've seen the documentary Val on Amazon Prime, but listening to how he actually speaks, and then knowing that they had to use a European artificial intelligence, machine learning company, they took a lot of his old dialogue and then made that voice what you hear in Top Gun, because that is not his on-set voice. His on-set voice would be like, very like, trying to talk out of a, stema kind of thing. But
yeah, I think they got one of Val Kilmer's sons to help a little bit as well. But to put all that together, I didn't thought about that connection between Hayden Christensen and Val Kilmer. It's a great redemption arc. I'll be sad in some ways to see the Willow TV show that comes out later this year, because I don't wonder what they're going to do with Mad Mardigan, who was such a great and fun character in the first movie. So I don't know, but it was a very touching scene and helps move the heart of the movie along to help us realize what is really important, which is a good moment to bring up my one complaint about the movie, which was, if Tom Cruise hadn't just been flying planes and polishing his leather jacket and riding motorcycles for 30 years and started a family, he probably would have realized some of this stuff a little earlier and not needed to have gone through some of this arc. It's total like male fantasy wish fulfillment, that especially that you get to hang out with Jennifer Connelly, who has a daughter from some other man, but now she's divorced and available, and you didn't have to put in any of the hard work, and you can just kind of, be this fighter pilot, awesome, what does Ed Harris's character call him, a stick jockey for 30 or 40 years, and then you get everything without having to put in some of the hard work of interpersonal relationships. That would be my one complaint about the movie, but it's a summer blockbuster, so let's also not overthink it.
For sure. If you were doing this in real life, like, that kind of stuff would be more gradual. And like the same with the forgiveness arc, right? Like, forgiving someone for getting your dad killed and for keeping you out of the military academy is not realistically going to happen in a couple of weeks. I guess maybe unless you get stuck in a enemy camp and have to escape together. Maybe that really would make the forgiveness happen that instantly. But I don't think so. It's hard to portray that process in film, right? Of the gradually coming to yourself and the gradual repentance process and forgiveness process. It's not a one-time event. It's a over the years event. But for cinematic purposes, one time works a lot better.
Sure.
I do love the scene though where Rooster offers the hand to lift after Tom takes the tumble, during the little dogfight football scene on the beach. Then, he lifts him up, and that sort of look like, oh, something's happening. There's a little crack in there.
If it were Beauty and the Beast, they'd start singing that song.
There's something there.
Yes, exactly.
Or just the whole, I love that there's just some good humor in it too, where Rooster said, where Maverick says, "What were you thinking?" And Rooster says, "You told me not to think." Just perfect line that has been set up the entire movie to be delivered perfectly at this moment of extreme stress, to sort of let the audience go as they all giggle at this hilarious confluence of what he's been teaching him and now what he's saying in the moment. What were you thinking? Anyway, some great crafting of little moments like that as they went along too.
So I like that, Carl. I'll add, I think that there was a really nice payoff with Hangman's character, because you hate him the whole time. You just hate him. And everybody has the Hangman from their life where they're like, I know that kid. He was in high school, right? Like, whoever it was, we all know that guy. And it's just like, he bugs you, and he bugs you so well. And he is a brilliant character. And in your head, you know that he's like not really a bad guy, but he's just such a jerk that you want to kind of see him get squished. And so that's a redemption arc that actually felt really good. Brandon Sanderson said something really interesting about good writing. He said, it's not that hard. You make promises and then you pay them off. And I think that's part of what was gotten right here, was that it was like, there were clear implications about, okay, I'm promising this and this and this. And then it pays off really, really rich in the end. And you just go, ooh, yeah, that feels good. That feels really, really nice.
Yeah. Very tightly woven, the whole thing together very well.
You just love that line. This is your savior speaking.
Right.
There's a great meme going around the internet that compares it to the first Star Wars movie, New Hope, because like the mission is very similar. We need 2 people to go and shoot down this little hole, and then the Han Solo moment. That's your Han Solo coming back in, the jerk who's been a jerk the whole time, and then now he's like really gonna make it good.
Director Joe Kosinski more or less fessed up to that he asked the naval pilots, like, what is some of the hardest stuff that you can do? Put it all together into that one sequence, what they pulled off in the movie, and then it sort of follows along with the trench run, and then the Luke Skywalker and Han Solo coming in to save the day. It's all there.
This is a better Death Star trench run than the original Death Star trench run.
Indeed.
That's a good way to say that. I like that. It's good.
Because it has a better moral than like trust the Force, which is like, it works. It works for Star Wars. I'm not going to criticize Star Wars because obviously it is a great movie.
But like also like, talk to me, Goose. Are you there, Obi-Wan Kenobi? Like this is not a small amount of overlap here.
Yeah, for sure. But I just feel like it worked so much better because then they have to depend on each other to get out, whereas Luke is on his own. And I don't know, it's just such a satisfying union of both the action plot and the emotional plot ending at the same time, with them saving each other. So, all right. Anything else that we needed to get to before we get to our ratings?
I mean, I really want to talk about the masculinity stuff. Can I talk about that?
Do it, man. Do it. Go for it.
So okay. I'm going to try not to like give my whole spiel. I'm going to give my like very mini spiel. I think a lot of it. So there's this great Twitter thread that's like a history of all the times when prominent people have said men need to be more manly and women need to be more womanly, right? Like, and it's actually a really great historical thread about this is always a trope that is pulled out. It is utilized for political purposes. Like, let's be clear about all of that, okay? I think that what we're seeing right now, though, is that is being pulled on for political purposes. So this masculinity stuff is all being used as a weapon in the politics fight. That is really dangerous because people that like. Because I don't like that it affects politics, but B, I don't like the fact that it affects men, right? And masculinity and these concepts that are really deep. It ends up skewing things and warping things and all sorts of messiness. I think what we're seeing right now is that it is the concepts and the virtues that are being it's not that men are being treated poorly, which I think is a pretty silly thing to say. It's the traditionally masculine virtues. And I don't know that I would defend that we gender our virtues. I'm just saying that we do. This is an is, not an ought, right? Looking at it empirically, as I look at, if I say discipline, most people think men. When I say compassion, people think women. Whether that's right or wrong, I don't care. That's not my topic for today. And one of the things that you will find is if you make a list of all these masculine virtues all in a row, what you'll find at the very end of these is that almost all of them are on the outs in society right now, right? Whether it's discipline, whether it's like emotional stoicism, whether it's moral accountability and judgment and just authority. I was teaching my class at BYUI to students, and I said, the evidence we have says that the best results are from authoritative teachers who are both warm to students and also really, really demanding. It's the same as the parenting research. You don't want somebody who is neglectful. You don't want somebody who is permissive. You don't want somebody who's authoritarian. You want somebody who's authoritative. And the response to that from one of my students was, "Ooh, I don't like that word. It has the word authority in it." Okay, this is how we all are right now. This is our society, right? So I am going to argue that the reason why we like this film is it took all of those things that are currently on the outs: authority, moral judgment, risk taking, even when it's irresponsible. Right? Somebody complained on Twitter. They were like, "Oh, well, it's toxic masculinity because he didn't need to push it to Mach 11 or 10.1 or whatever." And I was like, "That's the whole point. If you only have to take the risk, it's not the same kind of a risk. Some of it is just being showy, and that's like it's being a peacock and showing your tail feathers and being like, look, I'm strutting and it worked, right? I think part of why we loved this so much is because societally we have swung the pendulum very, very far on these masculine virtues, and this felt like a blast from the past. It felt like bravery and heroism and being a part of a team and taking orders and working really, really, really ridiculously hard. And yes, winning the girl at the end, right? Like, which again, Carl, I also have problems with, right? All of these virtues all of a sudden felt like they were in their healthy place instead of like crazy wild, just be a man and do all the manly things, or the opposite, which is real men can be manly men by being compassionate, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, I think that, part of masculinity is accepting the feminine virtues too. But this was very unapologetic. It was like, hey, we're going to fly planes and blow stuff up, and we're going to like, have a dumb like fight with each other and do tons of push-ups because we lose. And it just felt really good. Because let me put it a different way. I think this is a supply and demand issue. There aren't that many films that do this right now. There just aren't. And so in the desert, like a little pool of water is just like a really precious commodity. I think that's how I would term this. I'm looking at Tom Cruise. I'm looking at everything else going on. I'm just like, man, this makes me want to make manly noises like from Home Improvement, right? Like, right? Like that. That's how I felt as I was watching this.
We're gonna build things and maybe do a cookout.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Sorry, Liz, what were you saying?
I was going to say, I totally agree with your analysis. I think we could make a similar argument about how there aren't very many good rom-coms anymore. And many of the rom-coms have swung in a raunchy, more lust-filled direction than the typical feminine film. So it's interesting that we're in a drought for both of those kind of positive versions of masculinity and femininity.
I actually really like that. By the way, when I wrote my heroic masculinity article, somebody else, a woman, came and said that there needs to be a follow-up, which is toxic femininity. And it's to your point of like, there are a lot of women right now who are not getting the stories that they want told. And it's because there are other people who are running the show and saying, no, this is what you want. Trust me. And it's like, that's not what I want. I like the old rom-coms. Like which one was it? It was, I was in middle school and I watched You've Got Mail. And I was like, that was so adorable. I loved it. I told a friend that and they were like, you like that? It's just so like, happy. I was like, well, is that a bad thing? Like, I don't understand. It's just so happy. And I'm like, yes, that's why I liked it. Anyway.
No, I have a whole lecture that someday if I get called into Young Women's, I'm going to give on how like romance novels are like pornography for women. Meaning that it teaches you a bad script for an emotional relationship, and then it makes it harder to have a real relationship.
I think that's a profound point. By the way, on this topic, and then I want to hear from Carl, there's some really compelling research by Janet Erickson and Brad Wilcox and their third co-author, whose name escapes me at the moment, and it was in Deseret News a few months ago, where they actually found that women who identify as more feminine, A, say that they have to be more courageous to do it, and B, identify as much happier. And the pairing of those two things is really interesting, because if it was just one, then it's like, okay, women are more feminine, but that's just because society treats you nicer. But that's not what they're saying. What they're saying is it's harder to be feminine. And when we choose to identify as feminine, we actually feel like those are the folks that seem to have a little bit more happiness. Now, I am not an expert in that. I don't know the research. It could be a lot of things that I'm wrong about. But at face value, that is a really surprising and interesting finding. And I can say for myself, like, I don't think that we need like weird masculinity competitions and like, let's not bring back the Colosseum and we fight to the death with barbarians. I think that there is such a thing as toxicity, and we need to like draw lines here somewhere, right? But at the same time, what was really nice about this movie is like, actually courage can be a manly thing, right? Holding in your emotions because you need to sacrifice that to the good of the team for a little while, that can be a good thing. It's not always good to release all of your emotions all the time and seek validation. And so I think that was that swinging of the pendulum back to the middle that I think they captured really well. Carl, what were you going to add?
Well, just on your point right there, if you have a military situation where everybody wants to deal with all their feelings all the time, that's why we labeled Star Trek Discovery Season 4 Star Trek Therapy, because that's what you get, and it ruined the season for all of us who were on that episode. In so many ways. I was going to say it's interesting that you talk about how this movie portrays all of these stereotypically masculine virtues really well, but I thought it was fun to see some of the tension in the movie itself, like taking orders is one, but then there's that great scene where Maverick's like, well, I've been grounded forever because Iceman is dead now, and the Admiral has grounded me. I'm going to take this plane and show everybody that the thing that we all thought was impossible can actually be done, and I'm going to do it by myself, by disobeying orders. And then you have that moment where the Admiral's like, well, you put me in a difficult spot, because I can either, like, kick you out of the Navy and court-martial you for completely disobeying orders and for ruining a $10 million piece of equipment because you flew it so recklessly, or I can assign you to be a team leader because you obviously are the person that I need to run this show. And so there, even in the masculine virtues, there it explored, at least in some ways, some of the tensions between them, and I think that's healthy too.
So a couple days that I was on set, one of the days was in the classroom setting when Tom is flying by himself. Tom was like 5 feet away from me in the back of the class, though. So that was a fun opportunity to be there. But then just like, oh my gosh, he's hit 1 minute, and just all this stuff. Anyway.
That's just really cool. Like, I've also heard he's like really nice and easy to get along with in person. I don't know if that's true, but
I mean, since we're going there, but I wanted to talk on Tom Cruise, but you wanted to talk on something that Carl was already starting.
Well, so Carl, I like, sorry, this is like way deeper than I have any right to be. I am not a mythologist. I don't know how any of this works, but like, I look at the fundamental nature of like middle school boys, and like what they have to learn is you can break the rules if you're really, really, really good. Right? But there's a trade-off there. If you just break the rules because you're breaking the rules, you're just kind of a dork and nobody likes you, and you're just going to get through. You're not going to be able to fly anymore. If you're really, really good, we're going to give you that shot. But there's a competence trade-off with authority. And that's because there's actually a meritocracy here, right? Like, there are a lot of things that we don't talk about anymore that were like very clearly laid out. And I don't know how much they decided. Like, I don't know if they were studying Joseph Campbell as they wrote this, right? Like, is this George Lucas 2.0, like where they're sitting down, Man of a Thousand Faces, or if it was just like, let's tell a story like from the early 90s. And if that's what it was, maybe we just had different stories at that time, right? And I don't know the answer to that, but I think that trade-off question is really interesting, because it's like, that's literally what I would preach to my middle schoolers. There's nothing wrong with challenging my authority. Right time, right place. I'm going to insist on that. But and also you have to be able to articulate why it's a good idea to change the rules. But let's have that conversation. Let's do it. And I think that was the risk-taking part that I actually really liked. And I think risk-taking is, again, like a masculine trait that we all think of. So anyway, really, really fun.
You're telling me that middle school boys do eventually make it through that stage?
Yes. Once they reach 45.
Oh, so long.
What I will tell you, and then I'll shut up for a second. Working with middle school boys, the one thing that I have found is that when you articulate, it actually drives them crazy. When you tell them that it's not actually edgy, it's very healthy and normal for them to challenge authority, it drives them absolutely crazy, and they stop doing it. Because it's like, don't worry, you're fitting the mold, you're blending right in, thank you for conforming to my expectations. But what you're really communicating is like, hey, it's good, it's normal, like, challenge the authority, but you have to do it in the right way. You have to do it at the right time. And you have to be good enough that I can trust that you're not doing it just because you don't like being told what to do. Right. And I think that that's a really powerful conversation to have with a young boy, because they need to make peace with conformity. They need to make peace with being given orders, but they also need to understand that orders will be given that they need to disobey, both for moral reasons and also because they need to take those risks. They need to get burned. They need to figure out what risks they're willing to take and what they aren't. So anyway, that's my masculinity take. Thank you for humoring me. Carl, what were you going to say?
Well, I just say, before we get to our ratings segment, which we should probably do pretty soon, I wanted just Brad to riff on anything that he had from the, it's like the standing next to Tom Cruise as all the actors were trying to, portray what it was like to watch Maverick go through this scene. Just any sort of behind the scenes things that you want to share about your experience making the movie, because I think that's just awesome that we have you here, and with the technology that they had to get the poor actors to be their own directors of photography and working with the pilots and the whole thing. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it was an amazing honor to work with the camera crew and the best guys and gals that you could imagine. Like, this flight suit, Dan Ming, his call sign was Dynasty, as in Ming Dynasty. And some of the behind the scenes stuff, you'll see him with, he's on the ladder showing Tom, here's how to trigger the cameras and things like that. So this is an actual flight suit used behind the scenes. And there's a slate, that the cinematographer Claudio Miranda signed for me. We worked with Claudio Miranda and Sony, the electronics company. Sony made the cameras that they use to film. It's called the Sony Venice. And so every cockpit shot that you see in the movie, on the actor's right-hand side, so left side of frame, our camera body is right there with a black piece of tape taped over our logo, over the Keslow camera logo. And we worked with Sony to get the camera separated from the sensor. So the body itself, the recording is on, mounted to the actual cockpit, and then a cable is going along the shell of the cockpit to 4 different cameras that are about this thick, mounted with 3 different focal length lenses, so they had different angles, 2 on the sides, 1 in the center, and then 1 sort of angle down. And we also worked with IMAX. This was the first film that had a digital camera that was certified filmed for IMAX. So that was a great opportunity for me to work with the IMAX team and work with Sony to get the camera qualified to shoot on IMAX. So as you watch the film, even as the digital version that you can find on iTunes, a lot of the scenes you'll see the aspect ratio change for the IMAX framing. Most of the scenes in the cockpit, you're going to see the IMAX ratio, but then when they go into the dramatic on the ground scenes, you'll have the regular 2:3:9:1 aspect ratio. So Sony surprisingly didn't think that the planes were going to withstand the G-forces. We mounted 4 planes underneath, 1 on the fuselage, 2 on the wings.
You mean cameras?
Yeah, the cameras. Inside these shock mounts, and they survived 10 G-forces. I mean, these cameras are rattling like crazy. And so inside, right in front of the sensor, there's neutral density filters and a wheel. And so on one take, when the plane was doing an invert over the mountain, when they're coming over to do the little missile run, one of the ND filters barely creeps in for a little. They didn't use that shot, but the Sony engineers were completely blown away. Like, you couldn't even try to mimic that by putting it in a washing machine or something. Like, you just can't recreate that kind of G-force unless you stick it on the fuselage of an F-18 and have pilots do crazy maneuvers. And so just working with Sony, working with IMAX, working with the camera crew, I mean, what they pulled off was spectacular, and the timing couldn't have been perfect. Like, that camera was custom built for this movie. Claudio worked with Sony a year before, to get this camera, telling them, look, we're going to have to run this cable. It has to be this many feet. We have to have that much data going back and forth over this teeny cable. And the cable had to be able to shear easily in case they had to eject in an emergency. And so all those little things that nobody would really know about, we had to go through working with the Department of Defense to get everything signed off. Because if one of those cameras comes loose and you're pulling those kind of G's, that would kill the pilot or the actor. That camera flying into their face, just all those different kinds of things that we work through to allow you guys to be in the cockpit, which is what Tom really wanted. He wanted people to feel like they're a naval aviator. And when you went and saw that in IMAX, having your entire field of view in that feel, that's really the evoking emotion that he wanted people to have. A lot of the actors threw up. They had barf bags. I don't know if any of you saw the behind the scenes with James Corden. I think he's like one of those late night guys.
Oh, yes. Yes, that's right. I did see it.
So if you haven't seen it, go see it. But I was able to see the uncut stuff back in 2019. I shouldn't say who showed me it, but anyway, he was just swearing profusely at Tom, like, you land this beep, beep, beep plane right now, because Tom was hugging the mountain. Tom was flying his little, not a naval plane or anything like that. He's got his own private jet that he flew James in. But I mean, just the crazy amounts of stuff that Tom does is amazing. And I wanted to mention what Ben was saying earlier about Tom Cruise. He's got some quirks in his private life, but as far as a working professional in the film industry, there is nobody more professional. Like, everybody on the camera crew, everybody I talk to, producers, they rave about his professionalism. He's the first to be on set, the last to leave, always makes sure everything's perfect, gets everything done. I mean, there's this bakery in Los Angeles that makes cakes for him. He, people that he's worked with 20 years ago, he's sending them cakes still for birthdays and different events. I mean, this bakery's sending cakes all around the world for Tom Cruise. I mean, just the little things he does. And yeah, he's got his quirks and Scientology, whatever, but nobody else is putting their lives literally on the line other than stunt people that you really don't know. As far as A-list named actors, he's risking it all for us, the audience. And I think that's very profound. Unfortunately, he's going to kill himself one of these times, but
he takes all the risks, man. Like, he's not messing around.
If anything, though, he'll probably die by riding his motorcycle just in and around Los Angeles, because all the all the safety measures on set and things like that. But him cruising around LA on his bike is probably what's going to end up killing him. But just, yeah, as far as his professionalism, there's nobody like Tom Cruise. Just amazing person. When he's in his zone working, it's flawless.
I heard it said, a critic of the movie was talking about how Tom Cruise might be the last true movie star. And I think that prediction might end up becoming true, because there's just, I'm just an observer. I'm not in the industry at all, but from what I can tell, everything you've said tracks with me. And we can't make fun of him for being a Scientologist. I mean, what is the Scientology is the religion, because there has to be someone for even the Mormons to make fun of, right? Like, so it's fine. We believe in gold plates and angels, guys. So, cut him some slack.
That's actually what I was going to jump in to say. It's like, it was interesting. There was an interview that he did where somebody was kind of making fun of his Scientology, and he just politely said, "Hey, you crossed a line, but it's okay. We'll get you back on the right side of the line. It's no big deal." He was super classy about it, very polite. And it was like, Tom Cruise gets angry during, and it's like, yeah, I would get angry too. Like, and as a member of a minority faith, like, I get it. People often misunderstand, sometimes for kicks and giggles. And if you're a celebrity, I'm guessing it's only worse. So, like, I'm willing to, like, that isn't an excuse if he does bad things. And I want to clarify that. And maybe he has bad habits or, whatever else. But it gave me, I want to give extra grace because of that, right? If people are looking at him and making fun of him because he's a little weird, trust me, you ain't heard nothing until you've talked to the Mormons. So
with that, I guess we head into our rating segment. We give each movie 3 ratings. Our first one is for objectionable content. We rate it on celestial, terrestrial, telestial, or outer darkness. As I was thinking about this film, I think the only hesitation would be you've got some military appropriate language. And I was recently in my writing group, we were reading a story that someone had written that was set in the military and had some colorful language. And one of the critiquers was like, yeah, there's some colorful language here. In the real military, there'd be about 6 times as much as this, so you're fine.
I was just going to say, a lot of them were reactionary or in good taste to each other. And so in that way, you could sort of say, well, they're just reactionary words. If they were like shouting profanities and calling somebody profanities, that would be one thing. But I think in the context of how they were used, they're just words that we have chosen as a society as, oh, they're taboo words. But I think in the context, it is that's just my own opinions on swear words, but
no, for sure. And we just want to give a rating so that if people have those concerns, they know that that's in there. And everybody has a different level of comfort, for sure.
I actually think if you're watching a military film and you're expecting it to be squeaky clean, then that's kind of a weird thing to be choosing in the first place. Like, I did not mind it at all. I think there was one F word and it made me giggle because I was like, yeah, that's appropriate. Actually, like, I would be saying that too, which is not like, I would never be, students of mine who are listening, no, don't do it. But the other one was there was some implied relationship status. And getting to Carl's point, I think it was more the male fulfillment part that bothered me. It wasn't super graphic. They were actually pretty classy about it. Like, it wasn't that kind of a thing. It was more just like, no, don't talk to me. And then the next night it's like, okay, we fell in love. Let's just, it'll be great. It'll all be fine. That part was a little bit like, if you've got a young teenager, for example, you might want to wait a couple of years. Like, I get that and wait until they're old enough. When that is going to be different in every family. I'm not going to take my 10-year-old quite yet to see it. It's probably a little bit scarier and a little bit crazy. But if he was 15, it was a great film. Like, that's a trade-off that everybody's going to have to make. But that's kind of how I was rating it in my head.
So I'd give it terrestrial, because you're right. There is one F-bomb, but it's at that moment where the other plane is doing that weird like loop-de-loop thing, and they're just like, what the. Anyway, and yeah, Tom Cruise sleeps with someone who is, well, I should phrase it this way, so Tom Cruise and Jennifer Connelly sleep together. They're obviously not married, so I would give it a terrestrial myself. Like, it's not super, there's a couple of things, but it's a PG-13 movie. It's relatively tame for a PG-13 movie. There's military violence, but if you weren't expecting that when you want to see a movie called Top Gun, I can't help you.
Like, even the military violence is fairly bloodless, right? Like, you might argue that we're all desensitized to planes shooting down other planes, but there isn't any like graphic violence.
You never see the face of the person dying. It's like a stormtrooper getting shot. Like,
exactly, that level of violence for sure. Oh, okay, our second rating is for artistic merit, and we rate on a scale from 1 to 5 popcorn balls.
I really quick going back, I agree with terrestrial. I'm going to give it 5 popcorn balls. I do want to just put in a plug. I think that the terrestrial rating is also in part because some of those themes of manliness, like let's just take stupid risks with a multi-million-dollar airplane. Like let's not actually. Let's ride around on a motorcycle without a helmet on. Yeah, I think that's the most fantastical piece of the movie is like you don't get to ride around without a helmet on a military base. Trust me, I know. Like that's not something that happens. At the same time, I thought in terms of artistic merit, it was just a gorgeously produced film. Like I don't think you could do any better.
For sure, for sure. In terms of like the camera work and the really cool stuff in with the cockpits and just like the amazing practical effects that went into this movie, it's definitely 5 popcorn balls from me.
Well, and the writing too, like the fact that we've talked about how it all comes together so well and we all felt so good and it, manipulated our emotions in the right ways we were expecting, that we're a breath of fresh air. Like, I would almost give it 6 if I could, because I like, and again, there are very few summer blockbuster movies that really hit all the right notes and that are just, you don't have to turn your brain on too much, you just have a good time. And this was one of them. It was like perfect. I loved it.
Technical side, the only reshoot that they did was the Val Kilmer one. Like most, even Marvel movies, like they have weeks of reshoots because they want to go back and redo stuff. This movie had 0 reshoots other than they wanted to reshoot something that they rushed in because they thought an actor was going to die. And then with 2 years of sitting on post-production, the only thing that they did was tweak some makeup lines. Like that's it. Like this movie artistically technically was more or less perfect in that regard because they had 2 years to make it perfect. There was not a whole lot left to do.
Which, by the way, I think they should do that with all films from now on. Like I don't know how to say this, but like we say production value, but I think the right word is craftsmanship, a willingness to go back and fix things and rewrite scenes that are not working and like figure like it just worked. And there's this X factor that is hard to explain, but it was there in this movie.
Yeah, everybody was on their A game behind the scenes and in front of the scene.
Absolutely.
And then our final rating is for Gospel Connections. We rate on a scale of 1 to 5 apricots. What do we think, guys? I don't want to exaggerate the strength of the moral messages, right? In the end, it is a blockbuster, a summer blockbuster film. But I think those messages are definitely there.
Yeah, I would give it a 3. And that's not a knock against the movie. Like, if the my personal way I rate movies is like, did it fulfill what it was trying to achieve, right? Did it fulfill the measure of its creation? And in that sense, Top Gun did. And it was not a movie to get us into a serious moral discussion. You can if you want, but really, we just were here to have a good time, and we did. So I give it 3, but that's not a knock on the movie.
I would give it a 4 only because of what I talked about before. I agree with you, Carl. If you're going to Top Gun Maverick for a moral lesson, then you need to take a philosophy class. I do think, though, that there was this really cool thing where they touched on values that we don't see enough of lately. And I don't know if I would call those gospel values, but I think that was a really nice touch in a way that felt right to me. I felt like that was a good swing of the pendulum, so I'm willing to give it a 4 out of 5.
All right.
You could say Rooster and Maverick hugging on the aircraft carrier at the end, and the Admiral is giving them that could have been a little church film by itself with the music crescendoing and the emotion that you're feeling there. Redemption.
Okay, I want somebody to now go and edit the Prodigal Son church video, but make it Maverick and Rooster. That would be amazing.
If you have any fans out there who do video editing, you have your assignment now.
And contact us. We could use a better video editor. Because it's me. Yeah, I totally agree. I think 3 to 4 is about the right place to land it, and considering your expectations. This isn't like Silence or anything like that, where it's a big moral question movie. Okay, Brad, so where can people find you if they're in need of some quality cameras to put in their military plane?
Yeah, you can go to keslowcamera.com, KESLOW camera.com.
And Ben, where can people find your stuff?
I am on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. I like to write sometimes for Public Square Magazine, and I podcast. So Radical Civility is my podcast, and I also hang out here plenty. So yeah, those are my main places to be found.
We need to do a crossover episode. I think that would be really fun.
We need to watch a movie about civility, but I can't think of very many that people would deliberately choose because it just sounds really boring.
I have a suggestion from Netflix's Black Mirror that I think may be of interest. But
okay, I'd be up for that. That sounds good.
We'll have to look into it. And then Carl?
I am on Twitter at Carl Cranney. You're welcome to come hang out with me there.
And you can follow my writing and book reviews on lizbusby.com. Thanks for joining us this week. Our next episode will be our Halloween special. Carl, will you give us the pitch?
I'd be glad to. So next episode, we'll be discussing Midnight Mass, a Netflix miniseries from horror director Mike Flanagan that revolves around a mysterious young priest who brings literal miracles to the small fishing community of Crockett Island. But the question is, at what cost? This is my recommendation, and I found this miniseries to be one of the most thought-provoking things that I have seen over the past few years. It's wonderful, and it's ultimately religion and faith positive. I do have to give a content warning without spoiling anything. There is a fair amount of blood and some violence, but genuinely in service of the plot, I didn't find it offensive at all myself. Your mileage may vary, though, so maybe use VidAngel or something to edit it if that's not going to be to your taste. But I loved it, and I think we're going to have a great discussion next time.
Fantastic. I'm excited. This has been Pop Culture on the Apricot Tree, encouraging you to seek after everything virtuous, lovely, of good report, or praiseworthy. See you next time.